Okay, good afternoon. You're here to see a talk on Akamai and SEO. So my name's Dominic Lovell.
Hi everyone, I'm Akshay Ranganath.
And we're enterprise architects within the consulting group here at Akamai. So we want to talk about SEO, obviously. So what do we mean when we say Akamai and SEO? We'll be talking about site architecture, crawl visibility, page speed, security. We want to talk about the technical elements of SEO and the new ranking factors, not necessarily content. So I've had a number of customers engage with me over the last few years about SEO concerns. I've had one content speak to me about trying to understand why their Spanish content was being indexed on English versions of Google. Other customers have come to me and asked about architecting crawlers so that they can get through their paywall. Trying to understand crawl behavior. Obviously, Akamai is the first point that the crawlers hit, so we have a lot of visibility in terms of what we can see. And then other customers have asked about bot management, understanding how the bot behavior across their websites are handling. So we're going to talk about Google, and particularly Google's best practices. Google still dominates search. About 91% of all search happens across one of Google's web properties, whether it's Google Images, Google Search, Google Maps. So let's talk about some emerging SEO trends. So that's actually my sons. One was 2 and one was 1 year old, asking Google. Obviously we know that voice is a huge thing now, right? So not only are you sort of trying to compete for the front page, page 1 of Google across 10 different results, if you're trying to target for search, you need to be the top ranking result, right? So no longer top 10, you need to be the number 1 result. So there's now more than 400 million Google Assistants worldwide as of January 2018. And earlier this year, Amazon announced that they had sold over 100 million devices. So, voice is a huge thing. It's going to be a big powerhouse behind search going forward. Page speed, and particularly mobile recently. So Google's come out and said that page speed is going to be a ranking signal in their algorithm. They've had that on desktop for a number of years. They want people to be able to find the questions that they have really fast. Brian Dean from Backlinko also found that if you have a fast loading page, you're going to be more likely to be the top result for a search via voice. Just recently, actually, Google came out and said they're going to be indexing mobile pages by default. Right, so if you have a new domain, that will be crawled via the Google search bot on mobile. So think new landing sites, campaign pages, all of that needs to be mobile friendly, mobile first. HTTPS everywhere. Google's really trying to promote the introduction of HTTPS across all of the web. HTTPS has been announced as a ranking signal. The Chrome team have been doing a lot in terms of advertising to end users, whether a site is secure or not secure. Even in the Backlinko study, 70% of all the top searches on voice was via a HTTPS website. And technical SEO, right? As I mentioned, there's been a number of things that customers have come to us about. Some of the big things around the technical SEO space that's been popular is things like site architecture, understanding about how JavaScript crawling can occur across the different bots, understanding AMP integration, speed, HTTPS. And Google just announced just recently that traditionally the Google bot was several versions behind what your end users might be browsing your website on. But now Google's going to make sure that they're up to date crawling your website with the latest Chrome version in every Chrome release. So that means you can now have the Google bot aware of new features, things like intersection observer for lazy loading, web components, lots of new features that are available in the most recent Chrome versions will be visible to the Google bot.
So Dom just mentioned what are the trends and what's happening. But let's take a step back and see how often Google actually changes their search algorithm. This is a study by Moz, and what they figured out is, on an average, they make about 8 to 9 changes per day, right? So that's the number of changes that Google is introducing on the search algorithm per day. So it's 8.86 if you want to know the exact number. So with that many number of changes, like we as website owners, content publishers, does it even make sense to keep track of it? Should we even care? That's probably the question. So the answer is both yes and no. What I mean by that is, if you follow the general trend, it makes sense. But if you follow the specific algorithmic updates on a day-to-day basis, it's impossible. So what do we know that Google already uses as the ranking factors? We know for sure that they use domain architecture. That is, how is your site actually structured? Is your domain secure? What is the kind of page speed that is exhibiting? Now, page speed is what they define, or site speed is what they mention in the documents. They never tell you what metric that actually translates to. That is left for you to interpret. And the reason is, if they mention it, we are all going to game the system. That's pretty much why they don't mention it. So you have to take that into consideration and try to guess what it is, but that is there. Then, of course, the inbound links, that is where Google actually started. And then the most important factors, which is what kind of an authority your content has. Now, this is regardless of the speed itself, right? So if you're Wikipedia, it's a lot more authoritative than akshay.wordpress.com, right? That is where that kicks in. The keyword intent. So what was the user trying to search, and are you trying to cater to that specific search? And how is your content itself structured? So if you look at the URL pattern, is it very clear, saying that, hey, this is, say, a news article and then followed by the title of the article. That makes more sense, and Google can interpret it better. And of course, what are the kind of meta tags that you have introduced? That Google can use for its indexing or for presenting the result back. So where can Akamai help in all of this? So number one, we can definitely help in site speed. That's pretty much like the bread and butter. But within that, where are the things that helps? Or what are the features that can help you? So number one, caching, obviously. The second thing is adaptive acceleration. So these are the things that's basically trying to cut down on either things like time to first byte or all the other perceived performance metrics, so that your users perceive the site to be fast. By interpretation, that also means Google finds your site to be fast. The next one is, you could use Akamai for targeting specific keywords through the domain name. For example, you're having Black Friday deals. You don't want to completely spin up a new domain, but you just want it as blackfriday.customer.com. It's going to be there for 3 months, and then you tear it down. You bring up the domain, use an Akamai config, we point it back to your origin, or we can play around with any kind of a logic there, and then you can tear down the domain. It's somewhat easier to maintain. Or even just handling the redirects, saying that, hey, you have a vanity domain, and then you want to send it to a specific target. We can handle that. Again, not only the domain, you can also target through the keyword, which is the URL. So you can have something like customer.com/black shoes, and we will translate that and send it to customer.com/c/some SKU ID, etc. Right? Now, apart from that, we can also help you with specific targeting. So geolocation targeting. So we can do this by sending down vary header saying that, hey, this content changes because of certain characteristics. So it could be the user agent, the cookie, and so on. And then we can also introduce the hreflang. So this is for specific language geo-targeting. You can introduce that within your source code, but if you are not doing that, you can introduce it through Akamai as a header. Same thing with devices. And the last one, domain consolidation, this is a use case that we've been seeing quite frequently. I'll not go into the full depth of it, but consider something like this. You have either completely different brand names, or you have an M dot and a dub. So in either case, the use case is similar. You're bringing everything down to one specific domain. When you do that, you have to not only worry about real users, but you also have to worry about how you're going to transition the bots, the Google bots, from indexing your old site to indexing the new one. So you have to open the gate at a specific point in time. How do you do that? You have to open the gate for real users. How do you do that? So those are the things that we could help you out with. With that, I'll hand over to Tom.
Okay, so Akshay and I spoke about SEO at our Edge conference about 3 years ago, right? And so one of the questions we often get is, how should I architect my site for a global audience? And what are the SEO implications? And in 2016, when we looked back sort of over the previous years, there wasn't a number of best practices, a lot of inconsistencies in what different brands, different companies were doing. So we can revisit that now and tell you what we've seen in the marketplace, right? So here's a list of do's, right? So do consider a domain strategy, right? Akshay mentioned that domain consolidation is very popular, bringing everything under the one domain, trying to increase the authority of that domain and leverage the power of that authority. We see a mix between country level, top level domains, subdomains, continent domains, path structures. So have one consistent domain strategy. Make sure that all your content is indexable and crawlable everywhere, right? So make sure you have links across different international versions. Make sure that Google's aware of that through your reflang tags. All content everywhere should be able to be accessed anywhere else. The targeting on Google is now happening at a much more local level. So I'm Australian. If I'm searching here in Vegas, I'm going to get content and search results based on Vegas. So a lot of the SERPs now are being personalized based on the end user, current location, and language are big factors there. You also need to understand your traffic patterns. So I had one customer in Australia looking at US traffic, but when we drilled down, we found it to be bot traffic. Obviously, we'd like you to think with Akamai in mind, consider Akamai in your architecture. You can have Akamai doing things like proxying to different language services behind the scenes of your website. Google's come out and said, look, don't do parameterized-based targeting. There isn't good support for the accept language header. Don't force your users into siloed regions without an easy way to switch back, right? I've seen sites where once you're cookied, you stay there, or you can only get to different regions based on the cookie targeting. You need to be able to make sure Googlebot can crawl everywhere without a cookie via the URL, and make sure that you target consistently, right? So a good example is Belgium users being targeted only for French, but even though half the country speaks Dutch. We see a big lack of consistencies across companies. So some companies use site domains in some of their branding sites, some use country-level top domains. Have one strategy, pick your strategy. We recommend domain consolidation.
I just want to add one thing there. So we had one case where a customer was actually setting a cookie for a user to make them sticky to a specific language geo. And when they noticed, the bots were not actually using the cookies. So it would just go in an indirect loop, infinite loop, and then the pages just fell off the ranking. If something like that is happening, be very careful.
Exactly. Okay, so let's talk about performance, right? Page speed is a huge factor now in terms of ranking and having a good user experience. Right, so the gold standard, particularly for Google, is this PageSpeed Insights tool. It's now powered by a tool called Lighthouse. How do we understand how to make our sites faster? Right, so you can profile on mobile or desktop. It'll give you a score. they've actually updated those scoring thresholds now. So these numbers might look quite low. This is a hotel you may recognize, but this is not uncommon. The scores being low, Google is setting a really high benchmark in terms of what it expects for performance. These particular scores are broken down based on other individual metrics, things like first contentful paint, speed index, time to interactive. I want to talk on two just very briefly, this speed index and time to interactive metric. If you look through the documentation, look through the code, Google actually tell you what those benchmarks are and what the weightings behind each of those individual scores are. So 60% of your score comes from these two that I mentioned, speed index and page interactivity. Speed index is a metric of how fast you paint content on the page. It's originally coined from web page test, and it's now used sort of industry-wide. Within speed index, or within the painting of the page, there are a number of individual metrics we can look at, things like first paint, first contentful paint, so how fast do we paint anything on the page? How fast do we paint something on the page? How fast do we paint something meaningful on the page?
So just to add there, so Google just announced something day before yesterday. They're introducing a new metric. It's not standard yet. It's called the largest contentful paint. So instead of first contentful paint, which is when the screen just switches to something meaningful, it's trying to measure when something which is the biggest on the page appears, be it like your hero image, the biggest headline, and so on. And they're also introducing something called site instability API. So if the content loads and the content drops because of an ad being inserted, the score goes down. Now, we're not sure how the Lighthouse score is going to be impacted through that. Just announced 2 days back, but then keep your eye out for that. Pretty sure that is going to become part of the standard soon.
So a big part of what we're seeing here is this concept behind perceptual performance, right? So as content owners, site producers, we have control over our own assets, our first-party assets, but most of the websites on the web are made up of content from first and third-party assets, right? So think about your social widgets, your retargeting, your analytics scripts. You don't have control over how fast or performant those assets are. Right, but you can control what the user sees. So this is why these perceptual metrics are very important. So if a user sees more content quickly on the page, they will perceive it to be faster. Page interactivity is essentially a measurement of how fast the user can interact with the page. If you've got lots of JavaScript, lots of processing happening on that JavaScript thread, your users may be wanting to tap on certain things, but because the page is blocked, that JavaScript thread is blocked, they can't do anything. They become frustrated. So page interactivity is a measurement that tries to determine if there's nothing happening on the network and you've got small running JavaScript tasks, then you have good page interactivity. Right, so we can profile this within the browser. This is a screenshot from Chrome Developer Tools. We can understand what are those assets? What are those different things, whether they are third party, first party? It's happening on the flame graph here to understand, are they long tasks? Are they affecting page interactivity? Page interactivity actually had a weight of 5. It was the largest weight overall. So it's a really important metric. Speed index here for the example that I've shown is looking at, okay, well, from our first frame to our last frame, you can see a lot of white content. Right? So we need to understand, how do we improve the speed index all the way? How do we get that hero image loading earlier so users see more content quickly on the page? And so if we drill down into the waterfall, understand, well, what's happening here, we do understand, okay, there is some tag management happening very early on the page, lots of third-party widgets, social widgets firing quite early, and we don't actually get that hero image until the 133rd asset, right? So we need to prioritize our own assets, prioritize what the users are seeing, prioritize for that perceptual performance. Okay, so we're on the DevOps track. We're talking SEO, but we can automate all of what I've just said. So I can show you a demo now. So I've got a store here that I've set up for the Edgewell demo. It is a WooCommerce store, so it's a sort of a popular e-commerce framework that we've got some products here that we could potentially purchase, some Edgeworld swag. So this is running live. And so if I have a look and run web page test or page speed insights over this tool, we can sort of start to understand, okay, what's happening, right? We can see here my speed index is a little bit high here, my time to interactive is low, but particularly if you have a look at the film strip here, you can see I kind of fall victim to this same problem where my users for several frames, several seconds are just seeing a white background and the hero image is taking a while to load. So I've got a theme that I've developed specifically for this demo. It's a theme that I've copied, but I've made some changes to it. So what we want to do is look at, okay, well, what's happening to that hero image? And if we have a look at the theme code that I've taken from online, we can understand, okay, well, there is a slider here. Sliders are notoriously bad for loading. There's lots of big images here. There's heavy JavaScript that needs to process this slider. So what I want to do is load this hero image as a placeholder before the slider kicks into gear. So I've made some changes here. This is where I've made my quick change here. I'm going to save this. And so I've got this sitting on GitHub. I'm going to commit my hero image change. So I've added that commit now. I'm going to push that up to GitHub. Right? So I've got my GitHub changes. There's some stuff happened there. 10 seconds ago, I made a change. And so what I've got over here is my Jenkins instance. So this is my build tool. I've set up a pipeline of several steps to go through and execute different things. You can see here right now, it's actually running a Lighthouse report on those changes. So in the different phases, I've got things happening here. I've got a post commit hook, which from GitHub will send a message into my Jenkins instance and automatically build this pipeline here. So I check out the code in the first step. I then take that code and deploy it to my staging site. I double check if there's any Akamai configuration changes. I can go and push those up to Akamai via the Akamai CLI. I've got my property files committed into my repo there as JSON. In this case, I haven't made any Akamai changes, so it executes very quick. It skips over those changes. And so it took about 14 seconds here to run a Lighthouse test. And then I've got some additional checks after the Lighthouse score because I have some JSON that can be parsed out from Lighthouse, and it will give me those performance metrics as a JSON object. So then my test will parse the JSON, understand, I've got some scripts that will parse it, understand what the score was, have an arbitrary threshold that I would like to set. So in my case, I've said, look, if the score drops below 70, then I want the build to fail. So in this case, it succeeded. It was above 70, and then my team's using Slack, so everybody can be aware that I've made a change and pushed a change into to Slack. If I jump across here, you can see here it's Australian time zone here, but just then, build 55 had a performance score of 82 there, right? So that's real time. That's happened. Build 55 is the one we're looking at, the top one that just ran. Okay, and so what I've also done is locally, once Lighthouse runs on my Jenkins instance, it will attach those scores to my build. And so you can see here in 82, which is the message we got in Slack, you can see here, actually, I do a better job now. So rather than, you can see over here, it takes a long time for those hero image changes to be downloaded and lots of white space. That's what we want to try and avoid. And then my change here, you can see, okay, we download the hero image straight away, and then sort of after the fact, the slider and the JavaScript there can load in. So the user's seeing more content on the page quicker. So all in all, everything there happened very quickly. My My build was less than a minute. I've got Lighthouse calling out to the live instance that's my staging site, doing all those tests, capturing the metrics, putting them back in. I then pass those metrics into the following stages in the pipeline, and then I take that report, the HTML report, and as we can see, I can attach it to the build. So I can go in and see every time, once I make a change, what's the performance impact over that. So I also spun up another quick demo. I didn't code this up myself. I took it from an example on GitHub, but this is using Grafana, and behind the scenes it's running a scheduled job to get the Lighthouse data for my website. So I'm tracking this, my stagingstore.edgewelldemo.com up the top here, and you can see here sort of ongoing scores that are being tracked over time. I spun this up just before the test, so there aren't that many metrics on these graphs down the bottom. But you can see here, I've got these thresholds that are in the red and orange and green. And so I can have an ongoing capture. This could be my prod site, it could be my staging or my dev site. So I can understand sort of change by change, build by build, am I affecting the performance? What's Lighthouse telling me? What does my SEO score look like? Here I've got a good score of 80. There's some improvements I could make here. In this case, the performance score is 60. So, there's some work to be done there. I need to take those recommendations from Lighthouse, some of the things that we talked about, potentially try and look at what my JavaScript is doing and improve my page interactivity. And so with that, I'll jump back to the slide very quickly. And so that was the Lighthouse CLI and Jenkins DevOps demo. To understand end-to-end, as you make a change, you can look at what's happening in your site from a performance, from an SEO perspective, capture those metrics, put them in your build pipeline, send messages to your developers, whether your build breaks or whether your performance score drops. You can implement things like page speed budgets, right? So that there are other metrics to understand how many third parties on the page or how many CSS files are on the page. You can integrate that from a DevOps perspective and have an ongoing visibility of those changes. As we saw with the Grafana dashboard, you can actually measure this ongoing on a regular basis. There are a number of commercial tools that are available to do that, such as Speed Curve or Calibre. But if you want to be able to measure how often those changes run or what environments they are, if they're sort of behind a firewall or anything like that, this is a good example of how you might do that. So there's some Docker files there. It's very easy to spin up. You can see end-to-end how that change might be done and how you have those measurements tracked over time.
Yeah. So just before closing this bit out, so the other thing you could keep in mind, what Dom just walked you through, is the concept of performance budgets. So you can actually set budgets upfront, saying that, hey, these are the different timers that we want to hit. And then when you make a change, you track against that. What we have not shown in this is if you use the Page Speed Insights tool, it not only gives you a synthetic score, but within the data, it also has the crux data. So crux is Chrome real user information. And that is more helpful because apart from just telling you like, hey, what happened on a specific test, it's actually giving you a whole distribution of performance. And that's more helpful because that is more realistic based on what your real users were seeing as Google is seeing it. And the slight differentiation is this. So if you use the crux data set itself, versus Page Speed Insights, on Page Speed Insights, it's actually going to give you that specific URL's performance versus other tools which may give you like overall what Google saw for the entire domain. So that's something you could try it as well. And what we have not shown is like you can integrate not only with the crux data, but if you're using Ampulse, you can use the Ampulse query API and pull the information in. So you have your synthetic tests, you have your performance budget where you tell what is the kind of performance you want. Then you have the synthetic tests where you are checking just before deployment saying, do you meet those targets? And then you can use Ampulse to bring that data in and say like, sure, we tested, but are we able to keep up with that performance that we want to give to our users. So that's something that you could try out as well. So just closing out the talk, here's just a quick mapping saying, hey, what are the different SEO criteria and how do we help? So you want to make the site fast, simple solution from Akamai. You can use Ion, you can use Image Manager, and Resource Optimizer. You want to make it mobile friendly. Of course, like pretty much for everything, the starting point is Ion. And then you can use edge device characterization. So this one will tell you like what is the kind of device that is making the request, what are the capabilities, what is the screen size, is it in a portrait mode, is it in a landscape mode, so on. You want to make your search result location friendly, it's a local search. You can use, again, Ion, edge device characterization, and then using edge device characterization, you can use edge side includes. So you can have specific areas within the page which maybe is trying to pull some kind of localized content, and you can stitch that in onto the page. Make the site secure, so it's just using the Akamai platform. You can use fast DNS to make your DNS itself more secure, but then just using certificates on the platform, that gives you the HTTPS bit. And finally, handling errors and outages. So this is something that keeps coming up, especially in terms of SEO. You have older URLs that have moved on, and you start giving out 404s. The moment you do that, you're losing out on all those opportunities from real users. And then Google is also going to start just, you lose all the score that you would have won. Basically, you lose the link juice. And the solution typically is to pass that link juice on in a way that you retain it on your site. The way you do it, you either have a mapping saying, hey, here is my old URL, here is the updated URL. That's the best match. Issue a 301 redirect saying that this is moved permanently to that new site. Don't have that, move the URL to one level up. So if it's not a product, move it to the category of the product. Don't have that, move it to the home page. But please maintain that redirect and keep monitoring your 404 errors. That is detected by Google. You can definitely manage, look at the 404 errors on Akamai. That's for your real users. But you can also monitor what Google is telling about its crawling information, and you can go ahead and fix that. The other thing that you could also look at is if you have a planned downtime, which is pretty much going away nowadays. If at all that is happening, you can also inject headers with a specific error code so that Google doesn't crawl your site at that specific point in time. That can be done, but we'll probably not go into the details, but it is possible. So you can try that out as well.
So we wanted to talk about lots of the new concepts, the new emerging trends, but I encourage you to go back and search for our 2016 talk. We talked about things like crawl budgets, where Google will go and crawl your page, and if your site is not performing well, or if it's choking under the load of the crawlers, it will go away and have to come back later. There's a number of topics that you could go back and look at our earlier talks. Just to recap on what we've talked about today, we wanted to sort of unpack parts of the technical SEO aspects. We've talked about things like site speed, right? There are metrics. Google have publicly come out. If you look through the data, you can get things from Lighthouse and how they're scoring those data points. As Akshay said, there's the Chrome user experience reports. So if you've ever opted and said, yes, you can collect my anonymous data when you install Chrome, that will be rolled up into the Chrome user experience reports. You can see what your end users are experiencing. There are a number of things now that we've seen over the years that are becoming best practices, whether it be domain consolidation or a number of SEO international best practices. I spoke about voice. My son's asking Google, what sound does a dragon make? This is going to be the future of search going forward, right? Particularly with the proliferation of mobile and the easy interactions. So you need to be aware that you're not just trying to rank for top 10, you're trying to rank for number 1. Mobile is huge now. So mobile, Google's going to crawl your site using its mobile crawler before the desktop crawler. It's going to index and be mobile first. So you need to be mobile first. There are a number of things that we've talked about around SEO best practices, how Akamai can help you. We can help with your site architecture. We can help with your performance. We can help with your security. So with that in mind, I'm going to close off now. We've got about 5 minutes and we can open it up for some questions.
Hi, I'm Ray from StubHub. Are you guys available to talk to my own SEO team?
Yes, yeah, definitely. So Akshay and I, as I mentioned in the first slide, we do these engagements with customers. We try and help not only your site architecture, but how that impacts your SEO. We actually have tailored packages around sort of Akamai and SEO now. Particularly if you're a premium 3.0 customer, you actually get access to those engagements ongoing. So talk to your account team. There are packages available. If you're not premium 3.0, then you can still engage with us as you need to. So definitely.
Great.
Akshay is based in the US here. I'm based in Australia. I help our Australian and Asian customers.
Yeah, just wanted to comment on some of your improvements you had on the board, but it looked like in the example you gave, when you improved speed index through handling that hero image, the time to interactive decreased as a result. And I think we've kind of seen the same things as we tinker around with some of those. Any recommendation, whether you can really improve all metrics or whether there's one you would really target over the others?
So interactivity is the largest weight. As I mentioned, that has a weighting of 5. That's the one that you should focus on. That's also the one that not a lot of people know about. People don't necessarily understand how to profile their page for those kinds of metrics. So if there wasn't one metric, I would focus on that. Obviously, it's a moving target. There's ongoing changes. I only did one quick change where I moved some code around and had an image load earlier than the other. So, there's probably multiple things that I could have done and Akamai features I could have turned on in this example, but given the time, I just wanted to show you the quick example. So the idea would be that you sort of can iteratively make changes and test, and then sort of work your numbers up as you go along, and then obviously not just do one sort of small change, but try and do multiple changes across the board.
So just to add to that, if you're using Impulse, this is, what we saw was a synthetic, but you can actually see what's happening on the real users. Normally what I typically do is like try to chart saying when is the page interactive, when is the first interaction, and what is the delay. And whenever there is a mismatch on when the user tried to interact versus when the page is interactive, you have users clicking and the site not responding. We can measure that. That's called rage clicks. That basically tells you like basically you're measuring how frustrated your users are. And you can sort of go back and fix that. Helps real users, helps Google as well. Thank
you. Yes. What is the difference between time to load and time to interact?
Time to load and time to interactive?
Yes.
So the load metric has been around in the browser for a long time. There's the navigation timing spec that sort of captures things like the DOM content loaded, the on-load event, which is typically sort of the last event that fires. These metrics that we've talked about here, like interactivity metrics, are newer metrics that Google and other browser vendors are coming up with, and then they're implementing, how they capture those metrics in the browser, how they report on those metrics. And so, yeah, these are just newer metrics, and they're kind of setting a standard in terms of what is best practice around performance and how do we start measuring that. So that's the difference. Interactivity, as we mentioned, is time that allows a user to start interacting with the page. The on-load is sort of the final load event. Interactivity will happen before the on-load event.
Sure, and just to add there, so typically there was a concept of nav timing, which is what the browser spec defined. So they basically tell what happened on the browser. So like it fetched everything that was supposed to be fetched, or it fetched until a certain point. These are all the things that the browser is doing. It has no real impact on what the user saw. Whereas the other perceived performance metrics, things like time to interactive, they're trying to guess what is it that the user actually felt about the site. So the difference is one has a proper standard, but it may not mean much from a real human's perspective. The other one has meaning for humans, but they don't have a fixed standard. So there is a difference between the two, and then even the browser implementation differs. So some browsers support everything that we have spoke of. Chrome definitely does it. Safari mostly does it. Firefox mostly does it. Safari is lagging behind. So when you actually work with real user monitoring tool, just be aware that a lot of these things that you see on the synthetic tools may not even be there on some of the real browsers out there. So
with that, we have to conclude. I'd ask you that you rate the session in the app. Akshay and I will be around after this, and we'll obviously be around for the remainder of the event. So thank you very much.
Thank you.